Hello and welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 1170th New Social Environment. I'm Chloe, Director of Programs here at the Rail, and I have the extreme pleasure and privilege of being your MC today for a conversation featuring Jilaine Jones and Andrew Woolbright. And now I'll introduce Jilaine and Andrew. Jilaine Jones was born in London and immigrated to the US in 1963. A sculptor, she primarily works with steel, clay, concrete, and plaster. Drawing, collage, and bas-relief are also a part of her practice. Her work contains ideas based on the phenomena and parallels of landscape, architecture, and the body. It is generated directly by the ideas in its structure. She studied initially at the College of Ceramics, Alfred, New York, and then at the School of the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. She's been a member of the faculty at the New York Studio School since 2001. And our host today, artist, curator, and critic Andrew Woolbright, is based in Brooklyn and is an MFA graduate from RISD in painting. Woolbright is the founder and director of the gallery Below Grand, located on the Lower East Side in New York. In addition to curating, he is an editor-at-large at the Brooklyn Rail. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Andrew to get us started.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today and on this lovely, very cold day to talk to Jilaine Jones. I'm couldn't be more excited. I've been excited about this conversation for the last couple weeks. I think everyone on the rail wanted to do this interview. We've been talking about it behind the scenes. I think every editor and writer we have has expressed just gratitude and excitement about this show and what it means. So I'm honored to get to do this conversation with you, Jilaine, and just congratulations, first of all, on putting this together in 15 Orient for doing what is one of our favorite shows of the year. But Jilaine, how are you doing today?
Hmm, fine. I'm thrilled to do this and very much appreciate it. Yeah. Yeah. So I'm good and thank you everyone for being here. Yeah.
Yeah, well, let's get started with this slide because I have a lot to get to, and I know we'll probably have a lot of Q&A questions as well. But I kind of want to start off with Hilton Als wrote like a really beautiful review of the show and express something I think a lot of people are have expressed, which is almost an embarrassment of like, here's this amazing work that really is like a revitalization of sculpture. But with that, there's been a lot of conversation I know in the past of talking about your work in terms of Caro, Picasso, all these different references. But something that came across for me in this show is just this like John Cates negative capability. Like you really resist any one type of uh, read of your work. It's not any one type of modernist sculpture or any one type of surrealist sculpture. And to me, I could very much see your work being a type of resistance, like a dialectical approach of not forming synthesis from things that you don't want to be. And I'm wondering if that rings true in some ways. Like, is there a type of opposition that you have in your sculpture, or things that you're trying to not fully integrate yourself to?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny you should say that because well, I mean, it's not. It's so true. Um like in 1987 when I did a workshop in Barcelona and Michael Fried visited and looked at my work and he said, I can't decide whether it's figurative, abstract, or architectural. And he kind of walked away and dismissed it because of that. I mean, as much as I so much respect his work, I was quite actually pleased to get that read because I don't feel like he was so pleased, but I was. And even, when I was a student in review boards, they would say there's a confusion between whether it's kind of articulated or found or process based. And I have always been interested in feeling free to mix those. And and I mean, I think that when having been always interested in making sculpture, I really believe that the playing field is absolutely level and that I want to have to take from a level playing field. I don't want to have to prioritize one thing or the other. And to think about being in one track seems, it takes away, sometimes 75% of the purpose is, or the impetus or the sense of reason why, or yeah. Mm.
I mean, yeah, it really comes through in the work, and I think there's something wonderful too, where, I mean, I think it speaks to the level of the work and just the excitement of it, that everyone's trying to attach theories to it. Like, what is the theory of this sculpture? And it turns into all these competing theories. Like, I loved Hilton Hall's bringing up Eva Hess and like the loop coming out of the form. But then, there's Giacometti, there are all these things. And it really does feel like a type of uh, coming close to an idea of a thing and then stepping back from it so it remains ultimately open. It's not a landscape, it's not a body, it's not a grid, but it's an awareness of a field and an array. I know you've spoken about it before, but like as feeling kind of confined by the difference between Donald Judd and Caro as like two opposed, or David Smith as two opposing forces in sculpture. I'm wondering if you have any updates of that, of like kind of feeling bounded by these really totemic ideas of sculpture that you're saying I'm not going to be either one.
Um, yeah, let's see. Um, well, I definitely, felt, and as soon as I kind of, learned so much from, um, Caro, I felt, its limitations,
Mhm.
um, and also had been, I think in always drawing, I was thinking about as well as the thing in space. And it's interesting, the inside out business of Donald Judd, his awareness of the outside as well as the inside always. I mean, some of my favorite Donald Judds is where there's this simultaneous awareness of outside and inside. And I think that's definitely a critique of Caro that I had, that everything was in the inside and organized on the inside, and I wanted to flip it out. I wanted to flip what was inside outside. And um, interestingly, a recent very simple body of work just has to do with that, taking built very fundamental built forms, containment forms that we make, and working from the sense of it being containment and then taking the inside and thrusting it outside. But I mean, when I was working, so the inside also has to do with the body experience. So I was, mm, I kind of reacted, and found a community in that, um, in the early 80s, with something that Tim Scott and William Tucker had been thinking about, and a group of advanced students there, about thinking about internal body movement, internal, and analyzing and the qualities and um, forms, that could get paralleled through materials in a body, in a model, a dancer, for instance. And so that was finding a correlation between a thing and the mechanics of a movement. Like, this is not that, but it was earlier work than this. And what happened is that, I got through that until the I would say it feels like a long time, but I guess it was till the early 90s before this one, before this 98 one. And I said, no, I couldn't stand the monolithism of it, the autonomy of it. It just drove me crazy that it was this object, that had, that and not just that, even within a confined object that in and of itself, it didn't open up anywhere to the viewer. There was kind of like this so self-involved, kind of convoluted. So at that point I decided that I started to draw very consciously things in space. And I also was starting to teach and think about bas-relief. And bas-relief is very, very interesting because it's a material that mm, so you have to kind of embody, you may have to make physical space, do you know? So suddenly like space itself and levels of space have to become formed, do you know? And
Yeah.
so that was like super interesting. And of course, I became more and more appreciative of the importance of bas-relief historically in terms of, how it kind of turned sculpture in the beginning of the 20th century also kind of inside out from monolith to field. Do with Raymond Duchamp-Villon, for instance, who kind of unpacked everything and spread it across, or some of Bacioni,
Mhm.
and so that analysis through bas-relief, and that first piece you showed, which is not in the show, from 98, of the two figures um, of steel, that is based on having a model in the studio, and then making a still life of the model, and then attaching that still life to a structure, and then putting a live model on the other end of it, and actually looking at it perceptually, so that the idea also of perceptual, okay, so that being like a kind of out of body situation or a phenomenal situation. Certainly phenomenal is in body, it's through our eyes, through our body, and became more and more of an interest in terms of its kind of physiological um connection, like looking at something perspectively and connecting that to different levels of body experience, you know
Yeah.
in depth, and proximities of confrontation. Do you know what I mean? Like very, very far is, becoming more head level optical. And I've talked about this a lot. More subterranean is kind of below pelvis. And even perspectively, how it's quite accurate the way it links up. Do you know? Like seeing a log at a distance, a long way off, 100 yards will be at like pelvis level, and it will have a certain kind of emotional import, because it's at that level for you, the viewer. Very interesting, like a psychological, physical meaning, because it's at that level, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, I feel like I'm taking too much time here because I'm thinking about like what happens next and wanting to stop it for a minute and have you ask a question.
No, no, no. That was exquisite. That was everything I could have ever wanted. I mean, maybe to go from there, it makes me think of like the architect Bernard Schumi and the Manhattan transcripts. This idea that like architecture is not just the building itself. He had this like really beautiful quote of architecture is always about love and death ultimately, and that like he made these abstract drawings that were the building, but then also like the trash can and a murder that happened nearby and squirrels running through the trees. And there's like a portent to architecture where it's like you can't just stop at the structure. It also becomes this magnetic accumulation of bodies nearby. And I like when I was in the room with your work, I was just like, these are like magnetized materials where they are landscape and architectural, but it's also like you said, the person on the walk or the person seeing the log at a great distance. It's like that reciprocal empathetic thing that happens to us. I think it's incredible. I mean, I think I guess to go with a question from that, because that wasn't really a question, that was an observation. I'm wondering because another kind of dialectic or a tension that I think is really wonderful going back to the bas-relief is there is a sense of foreground, middle ground, background at times, but it also collapses right when I get that sense. And I could equally see it as like a series of kind of competing stages. I wonder how you think of focal point. You know, like is there a place that the viewer is supposed to look at directly, or is it kind of a quasi space of like this staircase is here, but then this rock is kind of growing out of, like forever in the ground over here. Like, is it that field or is it the landscape? I feel like it's kind of indeterminate in between. Or is it case by case?
Um, I think I'll kind of like sideways kind of answer your question by talking about a change that happened
Hmm.
between how that organization made a big shift in the kind of two primary phases of the work in the exhibition. So um for sure, like the work time in the study, which has got, these three zones, one of which is kind of participatory and includes a lower and larger area, and then the a middle area is actually, what I mean, it's quieter. It doesn't necessarily involve anything um narrative, or it's just a place, and then the further thing is more of kind of melancholy and at a distance and at head level and something thought about and seen and diminished in size, and it definitely has more reference to kind of this, you know in fact, kind of Western organization of space, which is more human centered, you know, like, so we're looking at it and we're, rationally organizing it as it, it almost, it is, we can measure it out, and study it and analyze it. And then I, um, began to think about um let's see, you had asked me about exhibitions that I had
Hmm.
seen that were important, and this will help me at the moment organize myself, but I I was very moved by some work, some Chinese landscape painting, like from the 13th to the 17th century, maybe, really ink scrolls,
Hmm.
and and the 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 forms that were, the experience of it being more immediate and less controlled in a Western way, and more affected by not a collage, but just an assembly of different types of experiences. So it wasn't so organized. And it also seemed not based on the hierarchy of the human being. And I began to think beyond. the phenomenal experience, but more about noumenal experience, the the presence of the objects themselves and our and the idea of an unmediated read of that, or an unmediated appreciation of the like there's one here, the oxygen is one in this group, or Under the Wanderer is another one. This would be this here is earlier, so it is more about a yeah, keep going downwards there on the left. So this oxygen here, number 33, this one here, yeah, so that I became interested in not really having a controlling point, you know, and that the things would have more life and presence in and of themselves, and that it was kind of more um a mm, the a kind of intuitive um organization of perhaps, an intuited place, an experience of a place, of I mean, one is unable to take in a whole place, right? I mean, really, physically. And like there was a ask on the lecture, the talk last week about, well, I was speaking of, and I think this is also perhaps helpful, that, the notion of space, when you're organizing space, and you actually, I mean, that tends to be something that's talked about when you can control it and you can talk about spatial zones. But I think the naming this oxygen in general is kind of my slang for the idea of, no, it's not, this is more now an experience,
Mhm.
the idea of oxygen. It's not space, it's not being controlled, it's an element that um we're with and dependent on and succumb to. I don't know. So yeah, so it kind of had to do a lot, the work here, including the fossils. They are about taking away a kind of certain viewpoint that you're asking about, and making it more less yes, not this one so much, but the older fossils. Yes, 6-month fossil and the other one. They are in regard to this idea of not necessarily having an organized spatial control. That's more of a human control.
Yeah.
Although, yeah, sure, some of the language in this, on the other hand, is, kind of somewhat industrial. It's
Mhm.
the obviously the I think one might feel the activity of making as an artist in the studio,
Mhm.
but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this piece is one of my favorites in the show because there's a kind of like quirkiness to the work of like a sense of temporal shifting. You have like the really modeled forms, the fossil, has this like super length of time, or this like, like ancient history time, and then you have this like extruded kind of rigged space architectural form kind of passing through it impossibly. It's like both the man-made, or the architecturally designed, but also like the rock embedded in all of it. It's like really nice to have like the senses of time that you really develop. But something I've been thinking about too, and I'm wondering if it'd be interesting to kind of go towards this place, is like Amy Silman talks about, what is your unit? Like, what are some of these kind of taxonomic words for some of the languages you're developing? And I think like the fossil is certainly one, or like the really modeled form that reminds us of your hand. But then there's this kind of like girded structure. These like, like showing or revealing the armature within that indexes something. I'm wondering how you think about those when you reach for them in the studio and start working with them. Like how you think of like these kind of like spindly stick rigged forms.
Yeah, I was thinking as you warned me about asking this question, I of the transition from using more more opaque and dense, for instance, raw, to using the hollow,
Mhm.
to using the tube, which has space inside of it.
Mhm.
Um, and definitely, I think the tube became more um important as the space kind of seemed to get absorbed within the sculpture, and they were less um controlling in terms of spatial organization, but more about the 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 life of the object. So I say that, and as usual, I mean, like, you know, I completely like contradict myself to say that, of course, that basic idea has always been something um important to me, is the life of the object. But I'm just talking about it more specifically in terms of um the noumenal versus the phenomenal, and that to contain space within like a tube,
Yeah.
you're holding in the space,
Mhm.
and yeah, you're letting it possess itself in a way. I've never said this before, so it's an interesting idea. I think it's true. Yeah.
Well,
So, um, yeah, yeah. And then the difference between that space holder, for instance, not so much in this one. I mean, we could talk about this one. This is very different, but the space holder, um, of that fossil one with the kind of hill mountain chunks and the tubular pieces going this way and that. I mean, I think that I'm really interested in making an equivalency between that holds, it kind of absorbs itself, but with a certain amount, not too, doesn't hold itself too comfortably, you know. I'm still interested in my own version of assemblage for that kind of tentative effect, that I think, assemblage. I don't mean that as an adjective. I mean it as a way of working that's has many different purposes. Do you know?
yeah.
Um, Artist to artist, and I use it in one way. And so interestingly, with this one, which is earlier than the fossils, this is kind of a middle period. These combinations, whereas I mean, do you want me to say something about this? Or do you have a better question?
No, no, I mean, I'd love to hear about it. I also just think it's very interesting because, I've heard, I always ask people what they think of a show, especially if I'm going to talk to the artist. And uh, the cylinders or the tubes, I never interpret as architecture, or a lot of people saw them as pipes or saw them as relating to like a physical space. And the way you stack them on things, I always thought of them as really about the space within the tube. It's about that
Mm,
oxygen, that presence or a lightness, or that zone within the work is a type of airiness, or it's like trying to convey like a sense of object weight or lack thereof rather than a type
yes.
of sonification. But like I'd be interested in like, and I think part of it is this combination work where like almost like a crawl space is created underneath the sculpture, or it's like so much about the negative space within and underneath that really becomes a physical presence, or like so much about it. Is that something that you're like personifying or thinking about, or is this a relationship to the landscape in this one?
Yeah. Well, I guess I wanted to kind of pressure a contradiction
Mhm.
between the quality in a landscape and the idea of a kind of non-negotiable like thing, like uh built heavier material. It's a fired clay construction, a kind of it holds space, it has walls, but I feel it is pretty clear in terms of its scale. It doesn't want to be any other size. Whereas the more linear steel is um is holding space and itself and the works, connecting the works to a again, like compressing a a sense of a large field with something very, very intimate. So going from the intimate, but in a like fast, going from intimate to very large scale, fast, like immediately, rather than rather than giving you that many steps. Like in the time in the study where you're allowed to like move through it through a few stages. Yeah. So it's kind of a more of an immediate uh, combination. This is different.
Well, can we talk
I'm
about
gonna
like
stop
maybe
talking.
no, 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 please don't. This is incredible. And the conversation, I was hoping this conversation would be of like a common, like a complicated relationship of poetics and even like erotics. I think there's like a dark erotics to the suspension of understanding within all of the work. Like
Mm.
the times where you see your body at a small scale from far away, or you feel it literal and active, and you feel like you're really interacting with the work as a literal spatial thing. But then there are these like trompe-l'oeing of space, of things getting small and removed at a distance, no matter how close you get to it. It's the complexity of it is really wonderful and open.
One thing, since we're staring at this, that I was thinking about also with this, is if it's of interest, is that I was, I don't know, kind of annoyed at some of the I get, really reactionary, of course, as one
Mhm.
does to oneself and other things. And, you know, and and I was wanting to spread it to be more of a to be spread outward and in every direction
Mhm.
rather than it be so controlling, so processional. I didn't want this to be processional, like some of them had been. So, and I was also really thinking about minimalism. I think something I was, for some reason, minimalism was just in my more of a conscious thing, where it's certainly always affecting, but it was more conscious. And I was thinking about how about your experience as a viewer, and how, the importance of wherever you are, it's going to completely change your sense of it, of the object, of the work, or the installation, whatever it is, it is based on your position. And so I was interested in making something that was very susceptible to the viewers relationship to it, that it completely changed from wherever you stood with it.
Mhm.
Mhm.
I mean, it like that was, I think your work is really important, and I think your position in sculpture is really important, and something I know this is kind of magnetizing theories, but I think there's something kind of Sandbackian or Fred Sandback about the work of just absence or rawness, and then also this like this awareness, or it's a step between that and like Sarah Z and Keith Tyson and the field array, or like the open system that doesn't have a singular viewpoint. And I think that it's a really interesting space to try to build out as a sculptor, but rather than distinct objects that fill a room and you don't know the conclusion or end to it, this is contiguous. So, but it's not, like you said, it's not totemic, or it's not, autonomous or the singular thing. It really is trying to keep a solid form, but make it feel like multi-staged, or like different experiences that are all happening at once, like life can.
Mm-hmm.
Like I think
Yeah.
the easier way would be, like scattered objects throughout a room, but like you're really insisting on this being, welded and ceramic and these heavy shapes. So then it makes those materials, the rawness of them really transcend, trying to make it maybe rhizomatic or array-like.
Mhm. One of the things that I'm, been working on the last few years is making something which is somewhat even more of material and more of solidity, but make a kind of example of transition outside of it. Do you know what I mean? So that it's so that a kind of a weight spinning out of another weight is kind of just an example of transition into another dimension,
Mhm.
so that it doesn't, so that it kind of defies itself ultimately. And it's not really about itself, kind of in the end. It's kind of about what it's showing you can happen, about transition between solidities and the nature of the way certain solidities can be formed and respond to each other. Yeah,
Yeah.
being kind of an example rather than being. No, I mean they're sculptures, but I really mean that they seek to be um examples of transition, a passage
Mhm.
that that defy our own physicality. I mean, they're a little bit, funerary, honestly, I think for some reason, and I feel like if I'm kind of going to go back to something more lighthearted soon.
Well, I wonder about that because, like this is kind of telling on myself or telling on ourselves as a viewer, but the rawness I do, there definitely it communicates a type of melancholy, or a type of meditation on death, or a type of there's like such they're so restricted, and there is so much absence in this space. They're really kind of heartbroken. But I mean, I could just as easily see the rawness of materials just being a type of truth. Like, is rawness melancholy, or is it truth? Can it be both?
Well, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't think I'm a person, an authority on that. Um, but I I guess I think that when looking at it helps me always to look at a thing or an image. I guess I feel like, looking at the rawness of these two things here, I think um I guess I think that, the truth is in the work for me, and it knows, it speaks of it, in a way that I can't verbally, but it does seem to um present as very raw
Mhm.
truth. The truth that I find like says, okay, that's it, well, and just pulls me along behind it. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I ultimately we don't. I don't. Um, know it's going to be made in the end. I mean, it's just it happens, and you say yes, to it. I'm
Yeah.
sorry, I'm getting very vague in general
No,
here.
but I mean, I think we're trying a very difficult thing, which is to apply language to this noumenal experience. Like, and what I really enjoyed the most about your show is just we all have these experiences or these lives that index all these feelings that we can't really get to, of relationships to our body, to the world around it, to architectural space, to landscapes, that it's really indescribable, the scale shifts. And I feel like this is work by work, trying to handle it in a complex, a myriad of different ways. Not saying space and body is, but saying space and body can be, like, and for me, I guess I'm interested in maybe talking about these transitions between your different phases of work, because there are moments where, like this one and like the first slide, if we could go back to that one, where like I can really get a sense that there's like a rigged body, almost like a type of the way Giacometti used a cube, but you're collapsing it into a bas relief, and then after the collapse, you're pulling it back out into like a something falling out of it, like a slump coming out. So it's not just that. I'm wondering about those feel really, kind of a Madeleine or like a type of important work for you getting into more abstract ideas. But I'm wondering just how you're feeling about major moments of change within your practice. Because this does kind of act like a retrospective in some weird ways, but it's also a very specific window of your work that comes before and after. So, like, how are you thinking about this window of transition that is on display right now at 15 Orient?
It's interesting because you make me realize that it may be so that the work that what kind of frames this period is work which is more monolithic.
Hmm.
Um, and I do cycle through. I mean, and even during and within this 10-year period, I also there was a time, when was it, in 2014, when I decided to work um to work think about statuary and think about coming from the inside out, um and I kind of um went returned, and I think I do that, but I think that there was a period when I was working more kind of uh in kind of in this through the center from the inside, more somewhat more of a monolith, certainly like a constructed monolith, though. Yeah, so I don't know. I don't feel like there's a I'm yeah, I don't know. I don't know what to say. I'm always reacting against myself. I'm reacting against things I see too much of, for instance. Um, Something I see missing in my own work, or what I'm seeing, and I want that to happen structurally. I feel like we need to experience that through sculpture. I feel like sculpture has a role to play for us. It for me, but for us. And so I keep cycling around from the open to the closed, from the inside to the from looking through from the inside to the outside. Um yeah, and I have not shown for quite a while, and you um I'm working all the time so much when you aren't busy showing and being, paid attention to, you just, produce mass quantities. You just make, and you can answer every question that you have, you know.
Yeah.
So, and it becomes ridiculous. And you have to be careful of that, really. But I mean, but in the end, I have to say, I appreciate the all the time I've had to just to work and focus on and um not worry about it too much. I mean, I had a show in 2001, which was my kind of last proper gallery show before this one. The
Mhm.
one in between was a wonderful studio school show, but more in an institution, an academic school situation. And
Mhm.
I felt worried, at that point. I don't think I was quite ready for it. I mean, I think it's hard for. I'm going off subject here, but I think that I've been able to explore and explore and explore. I felt like I was getting shut down in that situation from asking questions, asking any question I wanted and answering it.
Mhm. Well, I mean, this is a whole longer, much and really interesting conversation, but it's funny. I have a sculptor friend I won't name who always complains about how much sculpture being done right now is done in a bucket. Like how much casting resin, mold making, the limits of space and sculpture really, also how much sculpture is really operating as a type of depiction of something or a representation of something or really trying to be a stylized version of it. And I was telling him about your show, and he loved your show. And I was like, well, this show is like really a philosophy of sculpture in terms of it's not trying to depict space, it's not trying to re-represent space. I don't even know if it's trying to interrogate it. And I think it's more complicated than space too. I'll throw that out there. But I think it really is trying to get, or that noumenal quality really comes across of like how do you express this indexed experience that we have that we really can't talk about. And I'd imagine that you really are kind of dealing with that I'm sure that can be kind of a lonely feeling within it because it really is like a true poetic philosophy that you're after, like work to work, year to year, trying to find.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know that um, I mean, that does, um, I don't know. I don't want to be melodramatic and say
Yeah.
yes, but I mean that is, um, kind of, but I always have, um, liked solitary work.
Mhm.
And I feel, very grateful that you know, that's always been very satisfying for me. And I think that could have been for the wrong reasons initially when I was young, but it's just been been a great tool to just work. But yeah,
Yeah, and I kind of want to complicate that too because I
okay.
don't wanna frame it that way, but I also think that maybe the question I want to ask with this is, or um, I'm really interested in the language you've used before of transcription. Of like you said, there's been moments where you like kind of were retranscribing or transcribing the idea of the statue or the bas-relief or um, Chinese landscape painting. And then there's this other impulse that you have that's like more like Harold Bloom's misprision of like disappointment in other forms of sculpture, or like, I don't want to go towards that. There's too much of this in my own work. And I'm wondering just like if there's some examples within this show that you think of as like the difference between that transcription and misprision of like attraction towards and wanting to kind of remix it or recycle it versus times where you're saying like there's too much of this in the world and I have to kind of resist it actively in what I'm going to make next.
Well, I mean, I could talk. I could talk about a recent reaction, but you want me to talk about a reaction within the show, for
No, I'd love to
instance.
hear recent. Yeah,
A
I'd love.
recent,
Yeah.
I mean, I think that I recently I think I was, like everybody else confined, during COVID, and I in a way, it was interesting. It was during that time I was making all sorts of experimental structures, very unnatural structures. None of them are in the show. I mean, they're so hard to understand
Hmm.
that that's why I was exploring them. But I then went to, I was able to go overseas and go to studios and galleries and in London and Paris. And I felt just frustrated with, like what is the I get very reactionary. I mean, when I was younger, I was interested in land art when I was 20 and 19, and I even thought that there's no point in making sculpture, for a while. I mean, I was just like throwing slabs of clay down on the ground and saying, that's it, that's all that needs to be done, what's the point? And
Hmm.
I guess I get so I felt very reactionary to the idea of the sculpture as a product, as as a as eye candy at all, as pleasing at all, as and why are we making sculpture? What is what's the message in it? Um and and I guess, I do feel like it's being produced and fabricated in a way which is there's a there's a don't know, a level of indulgence in the way that it's getting fabricated at this point. But sometimes, I it doesn't feel heavy enough to me, or have enough point of purpose. Um, it seems like we have assimilated the idea of sculpture in our culture so easily that it kind of too easily inhabits our culture.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, so I think I then reacted by doing something that was as boring as I possibly could. Like boring, 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 and just thinking about containers, what we make. Some of them were funerary, some of them were architectonic doorways, just even a wall, a box, a book, and then thinking about how us as makers, that's kind of the first thing we make as people is something to protect us, and it's kind of an extension of us. Um, and so to stop there and make that sculptural was all I didn't want to go any further than that amount of pleasure. And then make the thing happen based on that, um, ex, you know, those parameters. Yeah.
Well,
So that we felt it like more purposefully, because more like functionally, like what is the function of art, or sculpture? So I kind of linked it to function, like sculpture and function. What's a functional reason for making something, and making something that is functional? And then
yeah.
how does something functional, like, talk about, as I was saying before, like transition from through itself. I mean, I'd been very, very interested in the false Egyptian door, the false door, and the passage, the kind of symbolic passageway.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, like I think it's perfect that we're on this work along those like parameters, because I'm going to annotate Shelby, who said something I can't think of anything better to say, but I loved his observation. He said it's like it's such a simple gesture, like doing a loop or a fold over takes us out of the language of ceramics and into the world of sculpture, and just such a decisive and confident move. And I love that explanation. It's like not trying to dazzle you with fabrication or all these things. It's just saying that like what's a gesture that makes this material kind of blur or vibrate into a different category of interpretation. And the other work, if we could go to the slide of the space around the house, because I think you have that language, which is, um, again, like what's the gesture that I can do to kind of, uh, you know, jump genre to genre. But like I think about the other thing that you do at times is like a type of libido or like the kind of really modeled, uh, bulbous kind of thing that like could we go to that slide if that's possible? Um, like the kind of like big mottled pathos lump at the end of this like kind of kinky steel, linear steel thing that you've welded, which is one of my favorite units that you use, by the way, the kind of like kinked up steel that becomes like a slack line or something, or like a rope. Like it's like yes, like I think that like it feels to me there's another way in this show that like a type of libidinal excess kind of falling onto the floor is a way of making sure that it's not, overly fabricated. It's not spectacularizing. It's also like trying to get whatever is growing in the subconscious that needs to be desired and chased down.
Yeah, well, that's a good explanation to me. So, um, yeah, um, it's interesting, to look, I'm thinking that, um, there's a comparison in it between like the form, for instance, that kind of falls and is present and exists in the real world, maybe, it represents being above ground, and I don't know, the stasis, but also the inevitable like forms things become, like without necessarily wanting to become. I mean, they just like things happen, and reactions happen, gravity happens, even above, when you're getting this, ultimate form, and set of relationships.
Yeah.
And so the idea of a kind of reflection, um, a kind of laughing at that, and um, putting that in its kind of compressed and confined space. It is in a more compressed space. It's in a space that is almost uh uh because of its context, it's almost theatrical. It's almost of a moment. So the sense of it being more temporary and a kind of a scene, of a set of characters,
Yeah.
versus something that is, um, behind the scenes. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
Mm.
this work for me is just such a complete and unique idea of sculpture that like I just couldn't get enough of it, can't get enough of it. And I think it has so many of your languages or units or taxonomy working together really well. Like the concept of zones or like the way it creates rectangles and squares through itself or like creates objects of space, that kinky steel beam that you use that is like more than animistic, which is not trying to find what steel can do as its own expression, but you're kind of imposing a will on it, but in this like really clever way. And then the kind of crawl space libido fossil that it ends in this lump. It's like bathodic and wonderful at the end of it, you know? Like I think that this the zone thing that you're able to do, the fossil thing, and then this like yeah, what's above ground and what's below is like really captured in this piece all at once. My last question, and I want to give everyone time to ask you some things, but it goes back to like the kind of bent up linear steel piece, which is you've talked about animism. I think the expressivity of materials or the soul of materials does come across and works, but there are times where something is really manipulated, really transcends. You really loop something in a way that's uncharacteristic of the material that I think of. You really like push it past what we consider. And I just want to know if there's anything that you can kind of elaborate on within that, where you choose to maybe deal with a material empathetically through what it can do, and when you try to kind of personify your own will on it.
Right. I mean, when I was when I learned how to weld, I was, um, maybe it has some connection to, um, the fact that I originally worked in clay, and when I worked in and was very kind of I learned about kind of the what I think is some of the essential um ideas that clay talks about in terms of gravity and mechanics and construction. And clay was always like this authority to me. And so that when I learned how to weld, I then spent, I kind of rejected the work that student work that was kind of pieced together. And I decided, no, I'm going to actually emulate what happens in the clay, I'm going to really weld out, the clay feeling.
Hmm.
Um, and so that's very directly an answer to your question that I continue to do. But there is something about there's something deeper about shifting your expectations as you're looking at something where you're looking at hard but feeling soft, or there's kind of like an arrested um something surprisingly finite about something that is mobile, in its information, or it's what it alludes to, Um so the way the material almost could defy what um and make more evident itself as an object by being that much different than what it represents. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think that material empathy is it really another language of yours, and that drift is like really important. The two things, and I want to give everyone time to ask questions. One, this is one of that image is one of the best sculptures I've seen. I don't know how long. I just loved it. It's
Thank
not
you.
a critical statement. I just was blown away by the receding landscape and the body and everything you do with the material. But the sculpture that we showed a slide of that shifts from gray to pink, I think is kind of a beautiful metaphor, or like works as a metaphor of taking ceramic into welding and back again, or making steel feel like that. This like drift between sensibilities is such a wonderful language. And thank you so much, Jilaine, for doing this show, 15 Orient for hosting this show. It's really a feat, and congratulations, and thank you for talking with us today.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah. And thanks to 15 Orient too. Yeah, and to you. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Andrew and Jilaine, for that conversation. It's been an absolute pleasure to listen to. I have so many questions for you, Jilaine, so I'm going to try to ask as many as possible in this period that we have. Um, the first question is from Anonymous, to be asked by me on their behalf. They say, the work is incredible. Could you share your thoughts about the relief that appears within the sculpture in some of the pieces? How do you think about the dialogue between sculpture and relief?
Well, it's as I was saying before, it's that as a general question, the relief was a big part of how I began to understand the idea of organizing something spatially. So, and also to think about space almost as an object, like to kind of materialize it. Yeah. So, um, that particular bas relief, the paper bas relief that's in this show has actually got, um, more information that is, about confrontation than it does of levels through it, and it's more it's more immediate and psychological, I think, than organizing you through levels of space. Yeah, so it's yeah.
Thank you for that answer, Jilaine, and thank you for that question, anonymous audience member. The next question is someone in the audience wants to know how teaching affects your work, Jilaine.
Mm. Oh gosh, so much. Um, well, I've been able to work. I've had this wonderful situation at the New York Studio School where they are just I'm working on whatever I'm thinking about basically. And I did uh, a movement project early in the 2000s um, that I was working on in the studio, and really was just able to stretch my understanding through teaching and getting reaction and dialogue with the students about ideas about sculpture. And it's yeah, I appreciated my teacher so much, but it wasn't it wasn't so much of a dialogue as I feel is um you know I'll say this very important thing is that I think that I have stayed kind of young thanks to my students. I mean, they you know I get envious of their work. I get envious of the freshness of the work, and the way they can answer a question so directly. And I learn from it. And I always am learning from it. And it keeps me on my toes. It keeps me out of my own rut. So yeah, it's incredibly helpful. It's not just like being able to work on ideas with them, but it's also they're always sharing what they're learning with the group, and I'm also learning from their work and being very affected by it. Yeah. Hmm.
Thank you for that answer, Jilaine. The next question is for me. I'm curious if you can talk a little bit about what it's like in your studio. Like, what is a day like in your studio each day?
Well, I'm best in the morning. I love the mornings. Um, and um, sometimes by mid-afternoon, I have to turn on some music to push me forward, you know. But um, everything is, everything is, a kind of appreciated part of it, including the labor, including the cleanup, um, and then, I don't know what to say. It's just, it's an everyday routine. I do it every day. I'm not doing something I have to do otherwise. And, um, and I'm, I love I love to weld and it's hard to switch sometimes between clay and steel. I get, I get really obsessive about whichever material I'm with. So but especially when I'm with the steel and then casting. Although clay happens with steel too, and then that often gets cast. And casting with is something that I do, and sometimes with help, but that feels like it's a part of the making sculpture. I mean, I ultimately would love to be able to have more help and even maybe send something out to get cast. That would be amazing. But I think it's been things have evolved because most of the work happens in the studio. Yeah, yeah. Hmm.
Thank you for that answer, Jilaine. The next question is going to be from Cal. Cal, I'll pass you the mic.
Thank you, Chloe. Thank you, Jilaine. I haven't been able to get your show out of my head for these last few weeks. I really, really, really loved it. I was just wondering, I had a simple question. Do you work from or with drawings, preparatory or independent from any given sculpture? I guess, how do you arrive at the image of what the sculpture ends up being? I guess is my question.
Yeah, sometimes I consider that word image an issue, that I don't want to have something that feels like an image. But drawing, I love to draw, and I warm up first thing every day drawing, but more like just, looking at something drawing, without considering it kind of a project particularly, and then um, I like to do, collages and drawing in and of themselves. I'm not someone who does preparatory drawing for sculpture once in a while, but not really. The sculpture comes from the sculpture. It just keeps connecting to itself. The next one, pushes the next one out. And I consider kind of drawing in the studio, drawing and 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 a lot of work with ink and collage. And sometimes it becomes bas-relief, sometimes I add to it, sometimes not. It's more like um it's a different time working on a different material, but doing something synonymous, but in a different dimension somewhat. So don't really like a plan. I definitely don't have a preconceived idea. I don't fabricate from a drawing. No, no. Mm-mm.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Cal, for that question. The last question today is going to be from Fong. Fong, I'll pass you the mic.
Thank you, Chloe. Thank you, Jilaine. Thank you, Andrew. It's a terrific show, and it looks terrific in the space. So that credit goes to both Ben and Selby to leave some of the patina in those walls there. It corresponds well, so well to the work, Jilaine. And I picked up a few words that Andrew had used. He mentioned the word libido, and he mentioned the word kinky. And then I see it differently, which is what great work of art compel different reading for sure. But in regard to the poetic space, which Andrew also mentioned, I can't help but think of Guy Davenport, who in his geography of imagination, he said imagination is like a drunk man who lost his key and he got to get drunk again in order to find it. So I think this kind of sophisticated exploration, deployment of synthetic cubist structure, which I never seen anyone for a longest time, to be able to create that language without being academic, and I felt that this balance between brute density in the form, but at the same time there's a fleeting mobility. It's both. And somehow you managed to make it so well balanced between fragility and fragmentation, you know? And so I wonder about the idea of, how do you, I understand the concept of sometimes it's a formal synthetic reading or creating a structure synthetically is usually contained within the space. It's contained. But I think you go out that framework, extend it out, and I wonder how do you conceive it? In other words, that kind of haunting sense of humor is very visible. Andrew talked about that. Go out of the space, touching the floor, sometimes get stuck in the back and forth, like the way we see the Elgin marbles. The Elgin marble can be just as compelling from the back as it is in the front. The way things can move, mechanism, the structure, how it can be adhered to the wall. And I feel that front and back simultaneously is very much equally deployed in the work. And I was thinking, I don't know how to even frame the question because it's so deeply instilled in the work, the way that you perform your labor that is so succinct to the way the form is created. In other words, you don't take anything for granted, which is so refreshing to see. So what is my question? I don't even know what to ask anymore.
I hope you don't have a question. I might not be able to answer it, but
Oh boy, oh boy.
I'm so happy to hear the comment.
Yeah, so let me go back seated again without distraction, and then I will write you a letter. I think that may be better. All right, so forgive me for blending or talking endlessly here. But congratulations. It's a beautiful show, and it's perfectly installed in the space, and gotta go back and see it again in complete quietude, no distraction. So congratulations, and back to you, Chloe.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Fong Bui.
Thank you so much, Fong. Thank you so much, Jilaine and Andrew, for today. It's been such a pleasure. And thank you to Ben and Shelby at 15 Orient, who were so helpful in making today possible. Thank you as well to the Terra Foundation for American Art, who sponsor our new social environment and make conversations like this one possible. They also support our growing archive, where this will be shortly on YouTube. The Rail has been free and independent for 24 years. A donation directly supports us, our writers, our staff, and our operations. You can support our work through the link in the chat. And if you're free on Monday at 1 p.m., join us for a conversation with Deborah Cass and Maura O'Reilly on the occasion of the art history of painting, the art history paintings, 1989 to 1992 at Salon 94. And as is Rail tradition, you can now turn on your microphones and say hello and goodbye as you leave. Thank you so, so much for being here today, and have great weekends, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
you.
Thank you.
Thank
you
Bye-bye.
so
Great.
much.
Congratulations.
Thank
Thank you, Jilaine. Thank you, Andrew.
Bye.
Wonderful
Thank you,
show.
Andrew.
Yeah.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you, Jilaine.
You go see the
Thank
show.
Go see
Incredible.
the show. For those
Amazing
of you who haven't, as I have seen it already, I'm coming back tomorrow.
One
I
hell
can
of a
view it.
sculpture show.
Bye, everybody.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Bye.
Bye.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.